All right, welcome everyone. Hey, my name is Kylan Hunt with TWS Consulting, and I really want to just thank you for being here today. We're going to talk about soil sensors and the different types of soil sensors that are in the marketplace today. So let's not waste any time. Let's just go ahead and dive right in. Now, a little bit more on me. If you've not met me before, if you've never worked with me before, I'm a grandfather, I'm a father, and I'm a husband. And these are my kids, my son on the left, my daughter right there in the middle with her two kids, my son with his two kids, and then my beautiful wife there on the right. So those, my friends, are the reasons why I work in the water space. Those are my big why in this industry and in this business. Now, to get a little more specific on who I am, this is who I am in terms of leadership, in terms of business. I'm an executive director with the John Maxwell team, which gives me access to leaders and some tremendous leaders. Now, these guys are not necessarily leaders in the agriculture space, but they're leaders in the business space. So having the ability to connect with people in that space has been nothing but priceless. Now, I'm also DISC certified, and this is a space that's been very, very valuable to me as a business owner. In fact, I challenge you to that. If you've not been DISC certified, get a hold of me, because that in and of itself is extremely valuable to your business, because as you begin to know and understand different personalities and different behaviors, it will impact your ability to lead substantially. And it makes a huge difference in the business. How do I know that? Because I've lived it. And in the last 8 years, actually about 10 years now, I have been focused on recruiting and developing leaders in the water space, primarily the water space in agriculture. So through all of this, I've learned how to build new business models, learned how to be successful in that space. And I'll be honest with you, a lot of it comes back to the fact that I know great leaders who are helping me grow in mindset and in my ability, as well as my ability to see and understand different personalities and help them and impact them. So that's why, that's a little bit about me and who I am. Now, this commitment to you for this event, this is important. We want to review some different soil sensors today. We're going to look at the different ones that are on the market. We're going to look at a handful that are available to you to use at any given time. Now, there's differences between them. They all have pros and cons. I'm going to say that right up front. There's pros and cons to every kind of system out here. And that's what you want to go into this with, is a very open mind and be able to say, that makes sense for my operation, or maybe that doesn't make sense for my operation. I'm going to show you which ones I prefer, and I'm going to show you why I prefer them. And a lot of it has to do with my experience. It has to do with the longevity of the systems, and it has to do with the installation, which is our point number 2. The installation process is extremely important in my mind, because if we do not install well, we're not going to get good data. It really just comes down to that. Good data is going to give us great results. Okay. Now, the last point is extremely important to you: how to confirm the right sensors for your organization. If you're going to invest in this level of technology, you want to know that you're investing in the right things for the right reasons. So I'm going to give you some things to think about right at the end of this today that you can take back to your organization and know that if you choose to use sensors, you're going to use the right ones for the right reasons. All right, let's go ahead and dive into this. There's some things that we want to remember when we're looking at getting started with moisture management or soil sensors to manage moisture and crop production. There are a handful of things we want to remember. Number one, healthy soil environment should be a priority. Now, why do I say that? Because if we're doing well with our sensors, if we're using them to the utmost, our soil health, the foundation of crop production, the environment that root is developed in, the environment that root is growing in, should be improving consistently. Okay. So if you're focused on improvement of soil health, you're going to be successful in this space. Number two, technology should be adoptable. Technology should be adoptable. If you start working with a technology or start reviewing a technology and you start to feel like it's not going to be adoptable, there's probably a reason you feel that way. And this is something you want to be very, very conscious of as you're reviewing some technology. The third point is installation process. This is another component when you're looking at sensors, pay close attention to it because the installation process that disturbs soil is going to disturb your data return. Okay, even if the sensors are pulling good data out of the soil, if the soil has been disturbed, if it's impacted root development, if it's impacted infiltration, if it's impacted the soil profile at all, it's going to impact the effectiveness of the decisions that you're going to make. You want to make great decisions in a great environment. So installation process and disturbing of the soil is important. Now, like I said before, every system has its pros and cons. Everyone does. However, this one component I want to remind us all about, and it's that health of the soil. When we're using sensors, we should be able to get the water right. And we know that under anaerobic conditions or in too dry of conditions, we don't get the best results. And that's what we want to stay away from. We want to get as close to perfect as possible, which is what this pie chart shows. Okay. This pie chart simply showing what we learned back in college, what we learned, even some of us back in high school and FFA. We started to learn what it was like to have the perfect soil conditions, right? Partially water, partially air, and then these minerals and these products or these particles in the soil profile that make up the soil, right? And then of course there's organic matter. This picture shows 5%. I've never worked in 5% organic matter, trust me. So that would be like a dream come true to have 5%. But those are things that we want to be thinking into as we're thinking about optimizing with sensors. Now, there's a few challenges that you're going to face. No ifs, no ands, no buts. This is the soil triangle. I'm sure if you're watching this, you're very familiar with the soil triangle. You're very familiar with how these different soils work and sand, silt, and clay contents. So here's the challenges. When you're working with sensors, the manufacturer has no idea where those sensors are going to go. So they don't really know the exact water holding capacity of the soil you're putting the sensor in. They have no clue. Okay. Now, if you think about it from a manufacturer's perspective, if the manufacturer knew exactly what kind of soil you were going to go into and they knew exactly what the water holding capacity was for that soil, then they would calibrate the sensor to exactly that soil and exactly that water holding capacity. But no manufacturer knows that. Okay. So those are some of the challenges that you're going to face in that space. Now, like I've mentioned once before, and you'll hear me mention it a few more times, installation quality. See, installing a sensor in a sand or a loamy sand is not going to be the same installation as a clay or a silty clay. Not even close. And some of these different sensors, the way they're designed, they're going to install substantially different. And we just want to be aware of that. We want to be very aware of it because it's going to impact the results. Okay, so installation quality, again, critical. And then there's compaction. In each of these different soil types, compaction and soil structure and all that is just different. So when you go to put sensors in the ground, regardless of what kind it is, you got to take into account some of these challenges that you are going to face. All right, let's step ahead just a little bit more and let's look at the different soils in that triangle. This again is why we're putting sensors in the ground, okay? We know we don't want to get too dry and we know we don't want to get too wet. So the whole reason for having sensors is we want to keep our moisture content in the soil profile right in this range, which is actually a very small range if you're in sand or silty, sandy soils, or even silty loams or sandy loam soils. You just don't have the holding capacity, but there's tremendous available water there. Okay, that's what we want to remember. So there's different things to think about in all these different soil types, and we have to learn to work with what we have. Okay, so there's always a cost. What's the real cost of guessing? We're going to get into that. But let's just jump right into the different types of sensors. In a nutshell, at a really, really high level, there's two types of moisture measurement programs. You've got volumetric water. This means that you're simply measuring water in a volume of space. It's like going back into your science class and getting your cylinders, those glass cylinders that we used to use, right? And if you were to go pull like a 4-inch glass cylinder, 4-inch in diameter, filled it full of soil, and then put a sensor in there, that would be a volumetric reading. It's reading a volume of moisture in a very calibrated space. Okay, that's volumetric. The second type of reading is tensiometer or tensiometric. I can't say that today. So I call them tensiometers. Okay, a tensiometer is simply going to draw out water out of this sensor, and as it draws water down through this sensor, it's drawing it out. The soil is sucking that water out, representing the tension that a plant has to use to draw up water. Okay, so it's a pretty cool system if you think about it. As a tensiometer, it's going to pull that out and represent soil tension. And there's a lot of people in the industry that just live, eat, breathe, and die by that process. Now, the thing is, the tensiometer came out, I believe it was 1977 is when the tensiometer was first created. Since that time, oops, didn't get my other picture up here. I'm going to show you a different type of tensiometer here in a little bit. But since that 1977, there's been two basic types of sensors created in this space. We'll look at each of them here in a minute. This next step that we're going to take a look at is creating the scientific baseline. Now, when you look at creating anything in the soil moisture space, you've got to have a starting point. We got to have something to start with. And to my knowledge, with the research that I have done over many, many years, everything started with gravimetric water content, another way to simply measure water. Okay. The gravimetric system is probably the most precise system that we have in the marketplace today. And it's become a standard for all calibrations. Why? Because it happens in the lab and it happens at a very, very precise level. This is how it works. Someone goes out into the field and pulls a specific volume of soil, very, very specific. So that's what these tools are for. They're gonna pull soil out of the ground in a very specific measured volume amount. And that's going to include all of the soil particles, the organic matter. It's going to include the moisture, air that's in there. Everything that is included in that little volume of space is going to be pulled out, and then it's going to be taken into a lab where it's weighed. Once it's in the lab and it's weighed, now it can be separated out, the moisture from the dry matter. When you weigh the whole thing, that includes the moisture, you now want to go and dry all the soil down, get the moisture out of it, and weigh the difference. When you weigh the difference, now you know exactly what the water holding capacity was. You know exactly what the amount of water that specific soil could hold. See, so separating the water volume from the soil is extremely precise. So let me ask you though, when you're making decisions on the fly in the field every day, agronomically, how well is this going to work? It's not. It's not going to work. However, this, because it is precise, gives us a good solid standard to start with any system every year. Okay. It gives us an idea of what those different soil types are. So every soil being different, every soil have every field being different, even down through the root zone, the vertical plane of the root zone, there are differences that we have to work with. So how do we account for all this? How do we account for all this in the field? If we're going to put a sensor in the ground, how in the world do we account for all this? Well, we have to turn it into something that's realistic. That's what we have to do. So what I've learned to do over the years, and many other people have, is we learn to take all of these different types of soil and we create a standard. We create a standard for each sensor, and each sensor then has some kind of a calibration average or some kind of a calibration standard that it goes with. That way, when it's shipped out of the manufacturer's warehouse, it comes out with something built into it. Now, today, with the technology we have, there's a lot of sensors you can hook up to a computer, you can calibrate in the field. However, here again, it's not scalable. The more you go out to the field, the more it costs. All of those things start to add up, making it really, really a challenge with different sensors in the soil. So what I've learned to do over the years, and as I'm going to share with you a little bit more today, I'm going to put a sensor in the ground that comes from the factory with a calibration standard, and then I'm going to manage the trends. The trends in the data is what is really what's important. I don't need to have any numbers on the graph at all. I don't need to see a number at all anywhere to manage water. I just need a trend. And that's the cool thing about sensors in the soil. When you look at it from a little bit different perspective, you can learn so much. Now, I want to thank soilsensor.com for some of the pictures and some of the things that's coming up here. So soilsensor.com is go in here, take this and go check out this website if you want to, because they've got some really great, just basic core information about soil sensors that just quite out honestly made it fun to review this and made it fun to go back and just think into all the different things that I've done over the years. So go to this website and they've got some really cool stuff there. Now let's take a look at these tensiometers. The most common tensiometer that I know of anyway today is called the Aerometer. Aerometer is a company that's made these two different types of tensiometer that I'm going to show you here. The one that you're looking at next to the little plant is it was one of the very first Aerometer made systems, and it's just like the one we saw earlier. It's exactly this one here on the left that puts water in the tube. You got water in there. The plants or the soil draws that water out. It measures the tension, and then it can give you an idea of what the plants are going to experience. Again, a pretty nice tool. However, it's made of glass. You can't leave it in the wintertime. If it freezes, it's a problem, obviously. So there's some things there that make it a little bit of a limitation. But again, very nice tool if you're measuring tension in the soil. They also came out with an electrical system, and this is one that's called a Watermark. It's a Watermark sensor, works exactly like the tensiometer before, except it's electrical. Okay, so it measures electrical resistance. So that's really what you're doing. They've just calibrated it now into an electrical reading versus a standard water reading. So those are things that you can see in a tensiometer made by Aerometer. And again, we see a lot of these in the marketplace yet today. And in some places it works really, really well. In some places it doesn't. Of course, in a sandy soil, these aren't going to work quite as well because the tension is just not the same. But you get into a clay soil, things are going to draw pretty hard, and these things are going to work out really, really nice. So there's a place for them. There's not a place for them. The installation process, pretty challenging. These are supposed to soak in water for 24 hours, and you take them out and you dry them, and then you got to soak them again and then put them back in. So there's actually quite a bit of work with them. to really make them good. They do work well when they're installed well. And however, though, I don't have a lot of that time. I don't have the time to put in to really do this to the optimum level. So honestly, I've found a better way, which I'll show you here in a little bit. So that's known as the watermark sensor. Let's move on and let's take a look at some of the volumetric sensors, which has really become kind of a common theme in today's world. Volumetric sensors are used a lot more frequently across the industry, and I think you'll probably see why here in a little bit. The first two that we're going to look at are what's called a TDR and a TDT. And the time domain component of these sensors is what we're looking at. Really, what it boils down to is it measures time. And that's what makes these pretty unique, makes them fairly accurate, is it's just measuring time of an electrical current. Think about it that way. Very, very, very simple. Okay. Electrical magnetic current. And it's simply measuring the time of the draw. So there's a lot of different technologies out in the world today that do this. And I would challenge you to take a look at them, learn what they're about, and see if it's a good fit for you and your operation. There's things I like about these little sensors, and there's things that I don't. Let me show you a couple of them. Here's a TDR, time domain reflectometry sensor. So a reflectometry sensor has those little forks in them, if you will, and you can see there's a hole there. You put those into the soil in a horizontal fashion, and it gives you then the reading between those little electrodes. It tells you what the moisture content is. This one's a little bit differently, a time domain transmissometry. I'm not good with that word. But anyway, the whole idea behind these is that the electrical current travels in one direction. It doesn't go out magnetically like the one does up on the top. It travels all in one direction, but it's still measuring time. Okay, so as that electrical current is traveling, it's measuring time. That's the whole idea here. Now I'm going to get into why I don't really care for these sensors here in just a minute. Okay, so there's many different types of TDRs and TDTs out in the marketplace today. And like I mentioned, they are fairly accurate. That's one of the reasons that, they're still used today, and they're used on a pretty large scale in a lot of different places. Potential advantages, well, they can be a little expensive. Depending on what your need is, depending on how many of them that you need, how many you feel you're going to need throughout the soil profile, they can be a little expensive. It starts to add up a little bit. Plus, it's a multi-rod installation, so don't bend a rod, because that's affecting now how accurate the sensors are going to be. So you need to be a little bit careful if you got rocky soil or things like that, and you're trying to put these sensors in. That could be a little bit of a problem. Okay, so you want to be thinking about that. Again, your soil type and different things that you're looking at when you go to buy a sensor. There can be some calibration challenges with these. They do probably need to be calibrated most of the time. And that's a situation, and some of that's going to depend on the type of sensor that you buy. Okay, so I don't want to say that's the way it is with all of them. There's all kinds of, last I heard, there's like 600 different soil moisture sensors around the world. Okay, so they're all over the place, and they're all built with some pros and cons. Okay, so you want to be careful with that. But as a whole, there's some calibration challenges that you're going to have to think about with these sensors. Now I'm going to share with you my personal opinion. And that's all it is, my personal opinion, because again, these are great sensors. A lot of people use them for a lot of different reasons. I don't care for these sensors because of the hole. When you look at the hole that was dug to make these sensors work, that is a little bit of a problem to me, because even in that first picture there, you can see the different soil layers, and the hole was dug to put the sensor in. And to me, that's a little bit of a problem, because that's very much a disturbed soil. And I want to be able to measure a deeper profile, and I want to be able to do it with less disturbance to the soil than what that is able to provide. Now, again, some of that's going to depend on the crop. that you're growing. It's going to depend on what your purpose is, which we'll get into here at the end. And there is, like I said, there's still a place for these sensors. There absolutely is. You just want to make sure that you're equipped with the right tools for the right job that you're looking to accomplish. Okay. Frequency domain reflectometry sensors are a lot more common in the space that I work in, for sure. In fact, this is what I'm most familiar with, is the FDR probes. And this is a system that over the course of several years, I've learned to become quite accurate with. And when you learn how to manage, again, the trends, it works out really, really, really well. If you try to manage just the numbers, you're going to run into trouble, because these calibrations that come from the factory, they're going to be set up for a specific type of soil. It's not going to be right for every soil in the marketplace. And that's what we just have to remember when we go in to work with systems like this. It's not going to be perfect everywhere. And that's okay with me, because I know that calibration is constant. And as long as it's constant, then it works. I'll show you that here again in a minute. So these are some of the different systems that we have to work with. The TDRs and the FDR are volumetric reading. They're going to measure, and they're going to measure the whole volume of water around that sensor. That's what they're made for. And the tensiometers, they're going to measure water tension, the tension of that water draw into the soil. So a little bit different on both sides of the coin here. Again, both good systems. I prefer, though, the FDR system that we see on the left. That's my personal opinion. Now, I am going to stop there on the different types of sensors. This gives you more than enough to research out. This gives you plenty to go and just start reviewing for yourself. You can always contact me directly. My contact information will be here at the end of the presentation. But this gives you more than enough to really start researching and getting to know this industry a little bit. Before we call it a day, though, I do want to talk a little bit about installation. The installation and the impact that it has on data. So installation processes are one of the most important components of getting great results with a soil moisture sensor. The photos that I'm about to share with you came from Centex, and I just want to share with you what really is going on, if you will, below the surface with different types of installation processes. So the probes that you're looking at here, one is a direct fit method and one is a slurry set method. Now, before we go and say that one doesn't work and one does, that's not the case. They both work, okay? I've managed water with a slurry set. I've managed water with direct fit. I've managed water in both spaces. I'm going to share with you why I like one better than another, especially over the whole course of the whole year. But a lot of that goes back to my opinion. I've got a lot of friends in the industry that use slurry sets all the time, and they just love them. And the whole idea behind the slurry set is that it seals tight around the probe, which it does. You really have very, very little risk of air gaps and anything of that nature when you use a slurry set. So they do seal up very, very well. However, in different soil types, especially like sandy soil, where you have to mix a lot of slurry component in that sandier soil, you're now changing the whole composition of the soil. I mean, think about it. If you have to mix up a slurry and it requires a lot of slurry because there's a lot of air and pore space in a sandier soil, now all of a sudden you may have roots growing through that, but because you have a foreign material in that sand, that slurry mixture, I'm just not fully convinced that it's going to be as accurate. And here again, that's my opinion based on years of data and experience. That's my take on it. So I try to stay away from the slurry sets. When I'm looking at it, I'm looking for plant available water as accurately as possible in any given profile. I don't care if it's a silt loam soil or if it's a silty, sandy soil. I don't care what it is. I'm looking for plant available water. And that is the most important aspect. The thing about a direct fit system is it gives me the ability to see what the plant sees. To me, it's a lot more real for plant available water than a slurry set. And you can see there a slurry will change the composition of that soil around the profile a little bit. And then oftentimes we'll see where there's the roots will follow a path of least resistance. We'll see that there's a risk of infiltration of water being substantially different. I'm going to show you in the next slide. So again, plant available water, I want to be as precise and accurate as possible. So to me, the direct fit just gives me a little more real environment to manage my plants with. Okay. Now, when we start looking at these graphs, and these graphs are really, really messy, but I'm going to try to just focus in on two areas. But what we're looking at here, the top graph is a direct fit probe, and the bottom one is a slurry set probe. That's the only difference. One's direct and one's slurry. So it mixed up a little bit of a slurry mixture to install the probe, sealed off really well around it. And these are exactly the same probes. Okay, exactly the same probes. And these are actually sitting next to each other in the same field. Okay, so everything here is exactly the same except the installation method. Same calibrations, same everything, same system, except the install was different. So let's see what it did. In the top, the direct fit system, here's what I want to show you. When we irrigated here, there's an irrigation event, a little rain event, and you can see that it really impacted the top sensor, made just a little bit of impact on the bottom or the second sensor, and didn't touch the third sensor at all. So with the direct fit method, it was sealed tight against the ground, no slurry at all, and didn't impact that third sensor in any way. Now, you look at the slurry set, that's not the case. The slurry set actually infiltrated a lot more water right at the beginning. We can see it right here and right here. The top two sensors, substantial increase. And I'll be honest, that's what a lot of farmers like to see after a rain event or irrigation event. They love to see that big stair step. They love to see that big increase. They really love to see those big changes. And I get that. If you put something in like this, you expect to see a lot of data changes. But here's the problem. If my data is not accurate because I have a different soil environment than what the rest of the field is, I'm not sure it's the best way to look at the data, right? So in this slurry set, you can see it made it all the way down to the third sensor and hit that sensor twice. So the water made it that deep twice at the third level, never even touched it up here at on the direct fit installation method. Now there's one more thing to think about. The thing about water coming in from the top of the surface down through the profile is timing. We have to consider installation time and infiltration, or not installation time, but infiltration time. How long does it take for water to infiltrate the soil? So this is something that I'm always measuring with different types of tillage practices and different types of crops in the field, different scenarios like strip tilled and non-strip till, for example. What's the infiltration time like? And that's important because if you get a 2-inch rain in 20 minutes, that is not the same as a 2-inch rain in 2 hours. So it's substantially different. So infiltration timing is critical. Here, you'll see that in the direct fit scenario, we had water infiltrate the top sensor and the second sensor at about the same time. The third sensor, however, it was a little while later. In fact, it took almost 12 hours before we started to increase the moisture content at the third sensor level. Of course, these were wet up on the top two sensors. I mean, they were literally talking like the top 6 inches. It was wet, and gravity, of course, pulling the water through. It's pulling the water through that soil, but it took about, oh man, about 8 to 12 hours before it ever made it to the third sensor. Look at the slurry set. The slurry set, boom, boom, boom. It made it all the way down to that third sensor almost instantly. In the same reading time as the two sensors above it, it made it to the third sensor. And then every little drop of rain that hit after that increased at the third sensor level, and even down here again to the fourth sensor. So the direct fit, where it was undisturbed soil, no foreign matter in a slurry mixture, you can see here very, very little, if any, water made it to that fourth sensor. Here, we're showing substantial water to that fourth sensor. That bothers me a little bit. And when I see data like this coming from side-by-side comparisons, that's why I like the direct fit system. And I train people on direct fit. I look for systems. I look for probe types that are direct fit as much as I can, as little as I can disturb the soil. That's what I'm going to try to do. Okay. So to me, it's a little more accurate and it's more representative of the entire field. Okay. Now we have to think about the plant itself. So in position of installing the probe, and we looked at some of the sensors there earlier where we have to dig a bigger hole and then we put the probes in on a horizontal plane. That's a little bit of a problem for me also. And here's part of the reason why. Those roots I need to grow in that virgin soil, again, as natural as possible. So when I put a probe in that ground, I want to put a probe in that entire soil profile that's going to represent reality. Because see, sensors don't care. Sensors don't care what they're placed in. They're only going to give you certain truths about that area. So root depth, the type of plant, the type of root depth that we're going to develop, I want to be measuring that as much as possible, as precise as possible, with no disturbance to the soil. So I have to consider soil type, soil structure, compaction, root depth, root health. These are all things that I have to consider when I choose a sensor. And I also want to be able to choose a sensor that's going to give me a truth in an undisturbed area. So a depth of root, available water, timing, rate of infiltration, percolation versus transpiration. Those are things that we have to be specific about at the plant level. At the plant level, that's the key. At the plant level, that's what I'm looking to accomplish. So all of these things, guys, are about plants. So it's not as much about just soil moisture content as it is managing the plant. Now, you also have to take into account when you choose a sensor, what's going on in that soil profile. One of the things that we know, you'll see there on the right, is we have what is called capillary action. Capillary action is water that comes up to the top or comes up through the soil profile just by the drier soil on top drawing it up. This is something that we have to think about. Also, when you're putting a row crop in, you say you got 30-inch centers, we know water is going to move horizontally. I mean, think about it. Your plants are created to funnel water right to that root system. And when it does, it's going to funnel water. It's going to horizontally move that water. We got to think about that when we're placing sensors, when we're digging holes, when we're disturbing the soil. How is that soil or how is that water going to move in that soil if it's been disturbed? So those are things we have to consider as we're going through and looking for sensors to use in our operation. I threw this slide in again, and we went through this a little bit last week, but again, I want to touch on the importance of optimizing water. And this came from a tile situation, so they're actually getting rid of water. But this is the results, yield results on these fields just 1 year after putting tile in. I mean, look at that, my friends. We're talking on field 23, 148 bushel before the tile, on the average 197 afterwards. That's 50 bushel difference. Okay. So getting our water right, getting that soil profile to have oxygen in it with our nice moisture content is huge. We often don't see the negative impact of too much water under irrigation. We don't see it. Now you get into the I states where they have standing water in some of these tiled fields, they see it. They know the impact of it. When we don't see it ourselves under irrigation, we just assume that ET is what we're supposed to measure by. That becomes a little bit of an issue. So I throw that in there because the impact of getting water right is profitable. And that's what we want to think about. So when we're looking at healthy versus unhealthy soil conditions, and we're looking at putting probes out here in these different conditions, we want to have a system that is going to really be accurate for that environment my roots have to grow through. It's not just about moisture content. It's about root zone environment and the management of that whole entire environment. And that's why I choose sensors very, very, very carefully. And this is the sensor of my choice. This is my number one sensor in the market today. And this is, again, that Centex sensor. And I use it because it's accurate for that root zone environment. And what this sensor does is I've shared it with you before. It's like a light bulb. Okay. It just turns on, shuts off in a calibrated space. And when it turns on, it's literally just sending a frequency. Remember that frequency domain the FDR, sending a frequency out into that soil in a very calibrated area, and it can identify water molecules. That's all it does. It's volumetric water management. Okay. So when you think about that sensor, and it's you can almost imagine it vibrating the water in a calibrated area, right? And it's identifying those little water molecules, the whole volume of water in that area. And ultimately, what this gives you then, every time that sensor goes off, it gives you a reading. It's going to, again, sensors are unbiased. They don't care what kind of condition they're put in. They're going to give you a truth reading. So in this specific example, you can see here we have increases in moisture content and decreases in moisture content. That's simple, okay? When you look at it a little bit closer, what we're really seeing here with those little stair steps is transpiration taking place and percolation taking place. One is going to make you money, one is going to lose you money. So using a sensor like this one here that I just showed you, this sensor actually makes money because I can measure that whole entire soil profile from top to bottom in the crops that I manage anyway, which are row crops and forage crops, things of that nature. Those things I can manage and make a lot of money with these sensors because I know the value. I know the value of measuring water and watching those trends. I know where my full points are, where we hit field capacity at. I know every time that moisture increases at any sensor level. Let's say I'm using drip. If I've got drip irrigation, I want to have one of these sensors in because I know capillary action is going to pull water towards the surface. And I know that drip being about 14 inches down in that soil profile, I know that some of that water is going to go down, but it's also moving horizontally. I want to know how it's impacting the whole entire profile. I can't just think about it impacting a part of the profile. I need to know where it's working everywhere. Okay. So I don't care what the condition is of irrigation application. I just want to get the right sensor. It's going to give me an overall view of the whole profile. Okay. Now we also have safe refill points. We can see nighttime and daytime activity, but that's what I love about this sensor. It can help me be more accurate. Okay. So when it goes off, it gives me this reading in here. I know that we're going to be better. That's what I'm focused on. If you were here last week, we talked about being better when we talked about soil health. Soil health doesn't happen overnight. Soil health improvements don't happen overnight. Water management improvements don't happen overnight. You're not going to learn all this in one single year. It is a process of understanding the purpose behind these things and getting the results that you look for. So that leads me to this point, choosing a sensor. You want to know your why before you buy. Now, like I said about the tensiometers here, which are on the right, there is a space for those. I personally don't use them because the volumetric sensor that I just shared with you has been so successful for me. And it's been an extremely valuable tool that a lot of our producers have used now for several years. But there is still a place for a tensiometer. Don't think that I'm not saying there's not. I'm just telling you that I don't choose that sensor today. Okay. Also, the TDR, the time domain sensors, I don't use those because of the disturbed soil, the horizontal installation. They're still very good for the right environment. Like we talked before, you may need to have quite a few of them, so it can get a little bit pricey. But you know what? Price is an issue in the absence of value. And if these are the kind of sensors that you need to be profitable in your space, then use them. But you want to know your why before you buy. And these are some of the things that I work with growers on and work with producers on before they buy a sensor. We talk about goals. We talk about objectives and outcomes. If they're going to put sensors in the ground, what is the outcome they want it to deliver? And we have to choose the right system to deliver that outcome. That's really all it boils down to. We want to talk about learning expectations. What is the one thing or two thing or three things? I don't try to get carried away, but what are the one, two, or maybe three things that a producer wants to learn with a sensor? And if part of this is financial return, then I need to know that. I need to know exactly what that means. Is the learning curve enough that a break even with a sensor is sufficient? We need to know that, right? So this is what we're talking about in making sure we're asking the right questions to establish the right expectations to deliver the right results. So we also have to consider the soil type in these scenarios. Tillage type is one I didn't put in here, but are we doing strip till? Are we doing conventional till, no till? All of these things make a difference. When you look about crop type and root depth, different types of forages have different types of root depth, different types of, even some of our different corn products now and hybrids have different root depths that they're working from. These are things that you want to think into seriously before you buy a sensor. Again, irrigation type. There's a space, even like that sensor that I shared with you earlier. I've seen some above ground drip scenarios, above ground drip systems, where that sensor that I showed you that I use regularly, I probably wouldn't choose that sensor in spaces where there's above ground drip. Okay. And there's some reasons for that. If you're using above ground drip, a different type of irrigation, you may want a different type of sensor. Okay. You just want to use what is best for the environment that you're working in. And that's the key. Now, let's wrap this up. I just want to encourage you guys to think into some of the things you learned about today. Do some research on sensors, but most importantly, get involved with sensors because they make you better. But the question that I have for each and every one of you listening to this is, how do you want to get involved? Our objectives with Transformational Water Solutions, and the IRIS platform is one that I work with quite a bit. Our objective is to make farmers better. I want to be quite honest with you. We want to make farmers better by empowering farmers and equipping them with information and data that drives dollars and improvement. So when I ask you, what kind of legacy do you want to leave behind? What kind of legacy do you want to leave to the next generation? If you're a farmer, use the right sensor to get the right results. That's a key component. If you want to be a dealer, get in touch with me. There's some different ways we can get you set up with different sensors and different platforms that will make you very, very, very successful as a dealer, someone who's working directly with the farmer. That's a key opportunity. The last one here is a service provider opportunity. This is a very, very specific opportunity that not everybody's going to have the opportunity to do, or not everybody's going to be able to participate in, but it is an opportunity. And if you're really considering, maybe that's for me, maybe it isn't, give me a call. You want to reach out to me, because if you're interested in any type of sensor that we talked about, if you're interested in any of this information that we talked about, or being able to work something out on your operation or serve an operation, get a hold of me. Reach out to me, and we will help get you set up with the right systems for the right reasons to give you the right results. So that's what I have for you here today, my friends. Again, just an educational session that I hope brings some immense value to you, your thinking, and the potential that soil sensors bring to your operation. So until we get a chance to meet again, my friends, go out, serve your customers well, produce well, and my friends, God bless, and may God richly bless you in this upcoming season of 2021. Thank you, my friends. We'll see you next time.